Orb on the Movements of the Earth is one of the greatest animes I've ever seen. Let's talk about the ending. I'll cut to the chase because I know the question everyone wants to hear about, and that's how can Rafal be Albert's teacher if he died in episode 3? One answer to this question is the alternate universe theory. If this theory were true, that would mean that the events following Rafal's death happened in a different universe than the one that we're watching Albert in. This would explain why the original story setting was shown as the Kingdom of P, but once we start following Albert in episode 23, it changes to the Kingdom of Poland. I'll be honest, this theory is pretty dissatisfying and thankfully it's easily disproven. The obvious moment that contradicts this theory is the letter from Jolenta. The letter mentions the name of Oxy's book and even includes a request to give Potocki 10% of the profits. If that weren't enough to disprove the theory, there's also the priest from the confessional with Albert. That priest revealed that in his past he had left a close friend to die. He's also blonde. I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that this priest is the same trainee inquisitor whose friend died saving Jolenta. But if it's not a different universe, then why do we have a discrepancy between the Kingdom of P and the Kingdom of Poland? I think the Kingdom of P represents the fantastical nature of the story that we just watched unfold. At every turn, it felt impossible and even improbable for the belief of heliocentrism to be passed on. And in the end, almost all the proof of it ever even existing and it being persecuted was erased. It might as well have been fiction or fantasy, so why not give it a name that emphasizes that vibe? The Kingdom of P. In contrast, the Kingdom of Poland represents something real, something that we can recognize. And that idea now matches some of the story elements that we're introduced to in episode 23 and after. Albert Brzezowski is a real person. The university he goes to and eventually teaches at is a real place. This is just my long-winded way of saying that the Kingdom of P and the Kingdom of Poland is just really good aesthetic flavor. So with the alternate universe theory disproven, is it possible that Rafal had survived and escaped to eventually become Albert's tutor? It sounds insane, it is insane, but let's entertain this idea anyway. First, we'll need to create a timeline to see if this is even possible. We know that Rafal was 12 when he died. Then, 10 years passed before Oxy found the hidden research, and another 25 years before Oxy's book was found by the Liberation Front. This means 35 years passed from when Rafal died and when Jolenta's letter was sent and received. We also know that the letter was received in 1468 because of the text in episode 23. If we subtract 35 years, we now know 1433 is the year that Rafal died. Since Albert is a real person, we know his birth year was 1445. Unfortunately, we have to kind of guesstimate how old Albert was in his backstory. He's probably about 8 to 10 years old. If you go with the younger side, that means it was 1453 during his backstory. If the Rafal we knew is the same as Albert's tutor, that would put him at the ripe age of 32. I mean, maybe? I would have definitely guessed a younger age based off of his appearance, but let's just keep playing devil's advocate because technically it's possible. So now we ask ourselves, how similar are both Rafals character-wise? They're both incredibly smart and they both love astronomy. Tutor Rafal has been searching for a revolutionary theory that could change the world. That theory could be heliocentrism. Tutor Rafal also says he's willing to sacrifice life to understand the world, or another way of saying to understand the truth. That could be someone else's life, or maybe even his own. Also, they wear the same clothes. So that solves everything, right? Wrong. Even though Tutor Rafal and Original Rafal are the same character visually and ideologically, it makes no sense for them to be the same person. First, you'd have to explain how Rafal faked his death in episode 3 and escaped. Sorry, but at this point, I'm not going to entertain the insane amount of hurdles and leaps through logic you have to go through to make that make sense. Also, he decides to keep his same name and appearance, and instead of returning to his research in the forest on heliocentrism, he abandons that and goes to start a knowledge cult. This theory is as good as dead. So the only theory left is that someone with the same name, appearance, intellect, interests, and ideologies was Albert's tutor. There's really no holes for this theory, just a crazy coincidence. I can understand why some might find this as a lame or unsatisfying answer, but once you ask yourself why, I think the decision to use Rafal's likeness was actually a brilliant one. Throughout Orb, we see lots of characters who put blind faith in religion do heinous acts. Torture, hanging, murder, etc. You know, the usual. Those that put their faith in heliocentrism kill as well, but it's usually either in self-defense or it's against inquisitors who have already done far worse, so it doesn't feel inherently bad. You might even say that original Rafal would never kill an innocent man just for heliocentrism. And I would agree with you. But what about 20 years after episode 3? In episode 1, we see Hubert threaten to kill Rafal. Later on, Schmidt considered killing a child, and Jolenta considered it as well. We never actually see anyone on the side of truth do anything heinous until the last episode when the tutor kills Albert's father. We've seen the extremes of what putting blind faith in religion can result in. So the author is giving us that same extreme, but from the other side. And to give it the impact that it needs to matter, they use the likeness of Rafal, the character that we started with who set everything in the story into motion. It's a warning to not put your blind faith in anything, but instead to approach the world how Albert does. Doubt when you move forward, and believe when you move backwards. Let's talk about Nicolaus Copernicus. I wasn't familiar with who that was until I ended up looking into it after the show, and I don't have a lot to share. Nicolaus was a student at the university that Albert taught at while he taught there, and as you can imagine, Nicolaus is the scholarly father of heliocentrism. His claim to this was a book that he wrote, which was printed in 1543. The book was able to be published right before he died in the same year. The name of that book was De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. I think it's easy to think of Rafal as the character who started everything. He's the first protagonist we follow, and it was his decision to end his own life rather than reveal where the research was hidden. That decision started a domino effect, which led all the way to Albert with that letter which had offered 10% profits to Potocki. When you really think about it though, it was actually Hubert who sent Rafal on this path, and for Hubert it was Potocki. Remember, Potocki used to be Hubert's teacher. I think it's pretty cool that the earliest character we know of to have started this domino effect was the one to have their name tied to it all the way to the end with that letter. What makes it funny to me though is that out of all the characters that we see carry that torch of heliocentrism to the finish line, he was the worst one. He turned his back on his ideas, and he even turned his adopted son into the Inquisitors. Even though he was trying to take back what he had started, it was too late. He couldn't, simply because his ideas and his influence had existed. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much research you burn, no matter how many people you kill, the truth will spread like an epidemic. Not even the host can control it. Thank you guys for watching. I'm sure I'm not even scratching the surface of the conversations that we could have about this anime. I just liked it so much I knew I had to make a video about it. Most of my content is probably going to be more lighthearted than this, but it's still all going to be anime related, so if you enjoyed, I hope you consider subscribing. It would help me out a lot. And of course, if I ever make money from this video, 10% of the profits are going to Potocki. Thanks again. I'll see you guys next time.